Nambi was unlike the other children in the village of Mutumbu. While the others ran screaming from the mere mention of ghosts or spirits, Nambi would laugh and chase her own shadow among the tombstones. She was lean, wiry, and sharp-eyed, with a tongue too quick for her age and a spirit far too bold for her own good. Her grandmother often scolded her, warning her to stay away from the old graveyard at the edge of the banana forest, but Nambi rarely listened. She'd been raised by her grandmother since the age of 5, ever since her mother, Owino, was buried under the fig tree in a grave that no one dared approach. The people of Mutumbu were deeply superstitious. They believed the dead spoke at night, especially those whose deaths came under unnatural circumstances. And there was no death more unnatural, more whispered about, than that of Owino. Before her death, she was feared, not because she had harmed anyone directly, but because she knew too much. She spoke in riddles, predicted rains and droughts with unnatural accuracy, and some swore they saw her speaking to the wind itself. When a child fell sick in the village, they blamed Owino. When a man's crops failed, they pointed to her house. Eventually, fear turned to hatred. The villagers accused her of witchcraft, and within days, her body was carried to the edge of the forest and buried in a shallow grave, without ceremony, under the spreading arms of the sacred fig tree. Nambi was only a child then, but the memory of her mother's funeral never left her. She remembered the look on her mother's face, not peaceful, not angry, but resigned. There was no mourning song, no priest, no farewell. Just cold silence in a shallow grave. Her grandmother, Wanjiru, took her in and tried to raise her far from the grave's shadow, but Nambi was pulled to it as though an invisible cord tied her to the earth beneath that tree. Every day after chores, Nambi would slip away and wander through the crumbling stones and thick, thorny underbrush that grew wild around the graveyard. While other children played near the river, Nambi built dolls from twigs and clay, naming them after spirits and planting them around her mother's grave. She didn't understand the danger, not fully. The elders said the dead must not be disturbed. They said Owino had not truly died. That her heart had still been beating when they put her in the ground. That sometimes, on moonless nights, the earth trembled over her grave as if she were trying to crawl back out. One late afternoon, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in orange and blood, Nambi found something strange. She'd been sitting in the grass near her mother's grave, humming to herself, when her fingers brushed against something hard beneath the soil. Curiosity sparked, she dug through the dirt with her hands. After a few minutes, she pulled out a bracelet made of bone, strung together with dried sinew and tiny carved beads. It was cold to the touch, even though the earth was warm. She held it up to the dying sunlight and felt her heart skip. She had seen this bracelet before. In a memory, faint but clear, her mother's hand, delicate and calloused, resting on her head, wearing that very bracelet. The moment she held it, the wind stilled. The birds that usually chirped and hopped about the tree line fell silent. The graveyard, always quiet, now felt breathless. Nambi slipped the bracelet into her pocket and ran home, her mind swirling with questions. That night, as she lay on her mat beside her snoring grandmother, she clutched the bracelet in her palm, letting her fingers trace the ridges of each carved bone. Her eyelids grew heavy, but her thoughts were louder than ever. She dreamed. In the dream, she stood in the graveyard under a sky with no stars. The fig tree loomed above her, taller and blacker than ever before. A whisper carried on the wind, soft and broken, like wind brushing against dry leaves. Nambi turned slowly. From the earth in front of her, the grave began to heave and crack. A pale, skeletal hand pushed through the soil, fingers curling, clawing for purchase. Nambi. Her name, spoken in a voice that was too familiar to ignore. She tried to move but couldn't. Roots twisted around her ankles, pinning her to the spot. The hand rose further. Then an arm. A face. Dirt-covered lips, still and yet speaking. Nambi, child of blood, wake me. She jerked awake, heart pounding, her clothes soaked in sweat. The bracelet had rolled away from her grasp, resting in the moonlight. Her grandmother stirred beside her but didn't wake. Outside, the wind howled through the banana trees. But beneath that wind, just faint enough to be missed, was another sound. Scratching. From beneath the ground. From her mother's grave. The moon hung low and heavy over Mutombo, its pale light shivering through the banana leaves like something uncertain of itself. Word had spread quickly among the village children, Nambi had been dared. It wasn't just any dare, and it wasn't just any night. Tonight was the season's first moonless night, the one the elders called the hush between worlds, when the barrier between the living and the dead thinned like stretched skin. No one in their right mind would wander the graveyard on such a night, but Nambi was not like the rest. When the boys from the village, older, louder, full of swagger, mocked her for her strange ways, calling her daughter of the buried witch, she didn't shrink. "If you're so brave," Otieno, the ringleader, had said with a sneer, "sleep beside your mother's grave tonight. Let her hold you, if she still lives beneath the soil." A crowd of boys laughed, clapping and hooting. Nambi, standing at the edge of the group, didn't flinch. She stared at them, eyes dark and unmoving, and gave a slow, cold smile. "Give me your father's hunting cloth," she said to Otieno, "and I'll lay on it all night long. By her grave. If I don't come back tomorrow, tell your mother I've gone to eat mangoes with mine." They fell silent at that, exchanging nervous glances, but Otieno, pride wounded, untied the faded cloth from his waist and flung it at her feet. That night, as the village curled into sleep and even the dogs fell silent, Nambi walked barefoot to the graveyard. The cloth in one hand, a small calabash of water in the other, and the bone bracelet now tied around her wrist like a talisman. Each step was slow and deliberate. The path to her mother's grave was choked with creeping vines and whispering winds. The air thickened as she neared the fig tree, and the hairs on her arms stood up in a silent chorus of warning. She spread the cloth on the earth beside the grave, right at the mound where the soil never settled. Even after all these years, the dirt there still shifted, loose and unsettled, like a wound that refused to scab. She sat, then lay back, arms folded beneath her head, eyes fixed on the swaying branches above. There was no fear in her, not yet. Only the slow burn of defiance. She would prove to them she wasn't afraid of the dead. But as midnight approached, something began to change. The wind dropped completely. The air became still, so still she could hear her own heartbeat. The trees no longer rustled. Even the insects were silent. And then the ground beneath her trembled, not a quake, but something subtler. A pulse, like breath moving through buried lungs. Nambi sat up slowly. From the darkness between the trees, a figure watched her. Tall, unmoving, eyes like two dying coals. At first she thought it was one of the boys, trying to scare her. But the figure was too still. Too thin. And then, with a sickening jerk, it moved, gliding, not walking, between the shadows, vanishing behind a thick banana stem. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the bracelet tightly. Her eyes scanned the trees, the soil, the grave. And then she saw it. A silhouette. Faint, but unmistakable. A woman standing just beyond the grave, her face turned away, her hair long and wild, swaying without wind. Nambi's mouth went dry. The figure slowly raised its arm, and pointed, toward the grave. Nambi blinked. The silhouette was gone. Her chest heaved. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She closed her eyes, trying to chase away the image, but the darkness behind her lids only made things worse. A sensation crawled over her skin like ants beneath the flesh. And then, she heard it again. The scratching. Soft. Insistent. From under the soil. She dropped to her knees. Her fingers clawed at the dirt without thought, driven by something deeper than curiosity. Deeper than fear. The soil gave way easily, too easily, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Her mind buzzed with whispers she couldn't understand. Her hands moved faster. She didn't notice the old man approach until he was standing directly over her. "Do not disturb what sleeps there," he said, his voice like dried leaves rustling in windless air. She looked up. His face was creased like bark, his eyes cloudy with milk, his feet bare and cracked. He held no lantern, wore no cloak. Just a long shirt that looked as if it had been white once, now the color of forgotten bones. "Who are you?" she whispered, dirt under her nails, breath quickening. He didn't answer. His eyes didn't blink. Some graves are sealed with silence. Some should never be touched. Nambi stood, shaking slightly. "She's my mother. That does not mean she belongs to you." And then he turned, disappearing as silently as he'd come. The grave still called to her. She ignored his warning. She couldn't stop now. Her fingers returned to the earth, digging deeper, faster. Her nails split. Her hands bled. But she dug. And then, her fingers struck something hard. Not rock. Not wood. Bone. She gasped, heart pounding like a trapped drum. She reached in, clearing the soil, revealing more, a forearm, narrow and pale, wrapped in rotting cloth. She leaned closer. A hand. Still. Lifeless. Until it moved. Before she could scream, the hand snapped forward and grabbed her wrist. Nambi awoke to the sharp sting of morning light streaming through the cracks in the thatched roof. Her body felt heavy, leaden, as if she'd run for miles or been pulled through rivers of mud. Her tongue was dry, and her head buzzed with the dull ache of 1,000 unsaid things. But it was the dirt, caked under her nails, crusted on her ankles, smudged along her jaw, that made her sit up in panic. She looked down. Her arm bore a perfect print, not just of fingers, but something colder, longer. A ghostly outline, pale and bluish, circled her wrist like a lover's grip turned violent. The mark throbbed faintly, cold to the touch, and her stomach coiled with dread. She barely remembered the walk home. Had she walked? Had she run? Had she even left the graveyard? Her grandmother, Ajuma, was already waiting when Nambi stumbled out of her sleeping mat. The old woman stood by the fire, her back rigid, her hands stirring nothing in a clay pot. Her eyes flicked up at the sight of Nambi, and something ancient stirred behind them, not fear, not surprise, but the quiet ache of recognition. "You've touched the soil, haven't you?" Ajuma said quietly. Nambi flinched. "What do you mean?" Ajuma motioned to the stool beside her. "Sit." Nambi hesitated, then obeyed. The fire popped, and a gust of morning wind rustled the calabashes hanging from the rafters. Ajuma placed a hand on Nambi's cold-marked wrist and closed her eyes. She whispered a few words in a dialect Nambi didn't recognize, then opened her eyes with a sigh like a closing door. "I was hoping it would skip you," she murmured. "I truly hoped." "What are you talking about?" Nambi asked. "What is this?" Ajuma stood, walking slowly to the corner of the hut where an old gourd sat half buried in ash. She took it, opened it, and pulled out something wrapped in red cloth, an even older bundle, tied in cowrie shells and frayed string. From inside, she lifted a piece of parchment, brittle and cracked with age. On it was drawn a family tree, the roots winding like serpents, the names inked in a steady, trembling hand. She pointed to the first name. "This is Abini. The first daughter. My mother." Then, with her cracked nail, she tapped the next. "Ajuma. The first daughter of Abini. Me." Then, lower down. "Oh, I know. My daughter. The first daughter of a first daughter." And then, finally, her nail came to rest on Nambi's name. "You." Nambi's lips parted. "What does this mean?" Ajuma folded the parchment slowly. "There is a curse, child. A binding. Every first daughter of a first daughter is chained to the spirit of the woman who bore her. Not in body, but in soul. You feel them. Hear them. Dream of them. You are their tether, and their mirror." The room suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. "But I never knew her." "Not really." "That doesn't matter," Ajuma whispered. "Your blood remembers. And she is not at rest." Nambi's hand went instinctively to the bone bracelet tied at her wrist. "She wore this." Ajuma nodded. It is the key. The bridge. It binds the living and the dead when worn by a daughter of the bloodline. She reached out of the grave, Nambi said, her voice cracking. She grabbed me. Ajuma didn't flinch. Because she needs you. Nambi blinked. Needs me for what? Ajuma's face twisted, part sorrow, part fear. To finish what she started. To break the curse. A heavy silence fell. Even the fire had begun to die. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because she tried to break it and failed, Ajuma said. And when she failed, they called her a witch. They buried her alive. She disappeared before she could pass on what she knew. I buried the truth to protect you. I thought if we didn't speak of it, it would end. Nambi's breath caught. But it didn't. Ajuma nodded slowly. The curse waits. It watches. And now it has returned. That night, the grave called again. It began with a low humming in Nambi's ear, like a lullaby sung by someone with no mouth. Then came the scent of damp earth, so strong it filled the room. Her legs moved on their own, rising from the mat, carrying her out into the cool night air. The village was asleep, the shadows thick and still. She walked past the fig tree. Past the cracked stone well. Toward the graveyard. The pole was stronger than before, like a string tied to her ribs being tugged from beneath the soil. The bone bracelet burned against her skin. The wind whispered her name. No, her mother's voice whispered her name. Nambi. She stopped, heart thrashing. I'm here, the voice said. I see you. Nambi's feet crunched the gravel as she stepped into the clearing. The grave pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Help me finish what I started, the voice said again, louder this time, coming from inside her own skull. Then, as she stared at the mound, a single word formed in her throat, one she didn't recognize but felt she'd always known. The bracelet shimmered. The grave began to stir. The days that followed twisted slowly into dread, each one steeped in the heaviness of what was coming. Nambi could no longer sleep. The voices had grown louder, clearer. Her mother's presence was no longer confined to dreams, it now lived in the corners of rooms, in the cold wind that crawled up her spine, in the whispers of the leaves that moved when there was no breeze. She knew what she had to do. And she knew who could help her. The blind seer. He lived just beyond the riverbank, in a twisted hut of hanging gourds and charms made from bones and feathers. Some said he had never been born, only stepped from a crack in the earth. Others said he had lived for centuries, feeding off secrets. Nambi didn't care. She only knew he had seen her that night at the grave, and that he hadn't been surprised. When she arrived, he was waiting by the door as if he had heard her footsteps an hour before she took them. You've come to dig through the roots, he said, his milky eyes glinting. Nambi swallowed. You know why I'm here. He tilted his head. Your mother was bold. And now you follow. I have no choice. There's always a choice, he replied, stepping back to let her in. But there is rarely a way out. Inside, his hut smelled of ash and wet moss. Symbols were carved into every wooden beam, symbols that glowed faintly when she passed. He motioned for her to sit, then took a gourd and began to pour thick, dark liquid into a carved horn. You seek to finish her path. To break what is bound. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then you must perform the ritual beneath the roots. It is the only way. She leaned forward. What is it? The fig tree above her grave is ancient, he said. It grows on death and memory. The roots run deep, through the bones of your ancestors. To break the curse, you must crawl through the grave on the night of the blood moon. You must pass through the soil, through the hollow beneath the fig tree, into the place where the curse was born. Her breath caught. Crawl through her grave? He nodded. And you must not scream. No matter what you see. No matter what you feel. If you scream, the grave will close forever, and you will stay inside with her. Nambi's heart pounded. What will I find? He looked at her for a long moment. Yourself. Your mother. And the beginning. The ritual had to be performed on the night of the blood moon, a night when the sky bleeds and the spirit world thins. Until then, Nambi had to prepare. The seer gave her a red string to tie around her wrist, herbs to burn at night, and a chant to whisper into the bracelet 3 times a day. But the village had already begun to turn. Children grew sick without cause. Chickens died in their pens with eyes wide and dry. Shadows passed behind windows without anyone walking. People claimed they heard a girl crying beneath the earth at night. When old Mzee Otieno saw Nambi walking near the fig tree, he spat into the soil and crossed himself 3 times. She is waking her mother, they began to whisper. The witch's daughter is waking the dead. The whispers turned to curses. Then stones. A group of men, drunk and shaking with fear, arrived at Ajuma's hut one afternoon, their machetes gleaming. She brings the darkness, one growled. She must leave before she curses us all. Ajuma stood between them and her granddaughter, frail but unyielding. Touch her and I will bury your names beneath the old stones. I have buried worse than you. They backed off, but only for a moment. That night, someone set fire to a corner of the hut. They doused it quickly, but the message was clear. They'll kill you before they understand you, Ajuma whispered. You must go. She handed Nambi a bundle wrapped in goat hide. Inside was a faded letter, stained with something too dark to be ink. It was addressed to my daughter, when the time comes. With shaking hands, Nambi unfolded it and read the first line, if you are reading this, I failed, but you still have time. The letter was written by Owino herself. It was both a guide and a confession. Owino had discovered the curse when Nambi was still in her belly. She had tried to break it using the old ways, crawling into the grave of her own mother, but something had gone wrong. The soil had rejected her, and the villagers, seeing her stagger home soaked in blood and earth, had branded her a witch. The night they buried her, she wasn't dead. She had taken herbs to slow her pulse, to fool them. But something went wrong in the earth. Something held her. Her final words were a plea, you must finish it. Go where I could not. And do not scream. That night, the blood moon rose. The sky glowed like an open wound. The village locked its doors and pretended the night was just another darkness. But they all knew. Nambi stood at the edge of the fig tree, dressed in the red shukka her mother had once worn. The bracelet glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She tied the red string tight around her wrist and whispered the chant the seer had taught her. The ground beneath the fig tree opened slowly, no digging needed. It parted like lips, revealing a dark tunnel just wide enough for a girl to crawl through. The air that came from it was cold and wet, filled with the scent of old things. She turned once, looking back toward the village. The world she had known. Then she dropped to her knees. One hand forward. Then the other. She crawled. And as her foot disappeared into the grave, the soil behind her shifted, and closed. The air in the tunnel was thick, damp, and smelled of rot so ancient it felt like it belonged to the beginning of time. Nambi's hands scraped against soft, wet soil as she crawled, each movement dragging her deeper into a place no living being was meant to go. The earth pulsed with a cold heartbeat. Her breathing became the only sound, until it wasn't. Bones. They weren't just buried. They were everywhere. Rib cages curved out of the walls like hands reaching to grasp her. Skulls lined the upper edges of the tunnel, many cracked, some split open as if from screaming. Femurs jutted from the walls like stakes, forcing her to twist and turn her body unnaturally just to pass through. As she moved forward, the bracelet around her wrist began to pulse with a dim blue glow, lighting her way. But the light also revealed things she wished she couldn't see, faces of the dead etched into the walls. They didn't look like carvings. They looked like they had melted into the soil. Some had mouths open mid-scream. Others had eyes that blinked. Then they began to whisper. It started like wind, but there was no air. Just soft syllables, curling around her ears. Nyambai. Help us. Let us out. Skin, yours fits. She froze. Her heart thundered in her chest. The bracelet flickered. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself. "Don't stop. Don't listen." But the tunnel had plans of its own. Suddenly, the soil shifted beneath her, and she slipped forward, tumbling down a slick, spiraling curve until she slammed into a floor made of bone tiles. The bracelet dimmed, then flared again. She was in a wider chamber now, a kind of underground vault. The walls pulsed with veins of something dark and alive. This was where the echo spirits lived. They emerged like mist, pale, shifting shapes, neither male nor female, neither living nor entirely dead. Their forms flickered, always on the verge of vanishing, yet undeniably there. They surrounded her, floating just out of reach, their voices layering over one another. "Let us wear you. Just for a moment, the air, the sun." Nambi stepped back, her heel catching on a dislocated jawbone. One of the spirits lunged. It passed through her, and she gasped. Her vision blurred. For a moment, she saw her own hands as shriveled and ancient. She felt the spirit trying to settle into her body, like a second skin pulling tight around her bones. "No," she growled, clutching the bracelet. Its blue light surged, and the spirit screamed, yanked out of her with a sound like tearing silk. More came. She ran. The tunnel tightened again, forcing her back onto her hands and knees. The walls pulsed now, almost breathing. As she moved, she began to see things. Not hallucinations, memories. Her own. She saw herself as a child, standing by the river, her mother brushing her hair with fingers that trembled. She saw the day her mother was taken. The screams. The rope burns on her wrists. The villagers' eyes, full of fear and triumph. She saw the burial. Not a ritual, but a punishment. She saw a wino being lowered into the ground, still breathing, eyes wide and pleading. The tunnel responded to her horror. The earth shook, and suddenly she was no longer alone. A figure followed. It was tall, thin, made of bones lashed together with sinew. Its skull was cracked, one eye socket glowing red. It didn't walk, it slithered, its limbs clicking like broken clockwork. The bone hunter. It didn't speak. It didn't scream. It simply followed, gaining speed every time she slowed. Nambi sobbed once, but didn't scream. "Keep going," she whispered. "You're almost there." The bracelet flared again, brighter than before. A corridor opened to her right, hidden, just beneath a spine-like arch. She dove in, feeling the cold breath of the bone hunter miss her by inches. The new tunnel sloped upward, but the air grew colder. Her limbs trembled with exhaustion. Her knees bled. Her fingers had turned raw. Then she saw it. The chamber. A circle of obsidian stone, etched with markings too old to name. In its center lay a coffin made of black wood, bound in chains, chains made of human bones. The bracelet's glow faltered, then died. Silence. For the first time since entering the tunnel, the whispering stopped. Nambi moved forward, each step echoing across the chamber. She stood before the coffin, her breath fogging in the icy air. There was something inside. She could hear it breathing. Shallow, rasping. Then, a tremble. The chains rattled. One by one, the bones snapped. Then the coffin lid groaned, and burst open. Inside was not a skeleton. Not a corpse. It was something alive. It gasped as air filled its lungs for the first time in years. Its eyes, wide, glowing faintly, locked onto hers. And it whispered a name. Nambi. The chamber was still, thick with ancient dust and air too heavy for the lungs. Nambi could not believe her eyes. Inside the coffin lay her mother, a wino, her body perfectly preserved as though death had been held at bay for years. Her skin bore no rot, only a strange, otherworldly paleness. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes, open and alive, stared straight into Nambi's. "Nah, Nambi," the voice was hoarse, broken like wind scraping against stone. Nambi stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled. She had imagined this moment in her nightmares, in her dreams, and in those strange whispering hours between sleep and waking. But none of those prepared her for the awful intimacy of it, her mother's face, alive, whispering her name from a coffin sealed with bone. Then her voice changed. Not the tone. The soul behind it. Owaino's mouth opened again, but what came out was deeper, colder. She opened the door. Now we walk as one. Nambi froze. Her stomach twisted with a chill no fire could thaw. No, she whispered. No, it's not you. Her mother's eyes flickered, one moment filled with tears, the next, glowing like coals in a dying fire. A cruel grin bent her lips, a grin that didn't belong to Owaino. I kept it buried, Owaino said, or the thing inside her did. But you brought me out, clever little daughter. You dug too deep. You crawled too far. Tears stung Nambi's eyes. Mama, fight it. Please. Another voice spoke, distant, buried within the same mouth. I tried to protect you. Then the cruel one returned, stronger, bolder. She sealed me with her last breath. Now your breath has set me free. Nambi stumbled backward until her back struck the bone-etched wall. The chamber felt smaller now. Closer. Pressing in. The bracelet on her wrist pulsed faintly, as though trying to resist what had awakened. Nambi looked at her mother again. She remembered every moment of love Owaino had given her. Every bedtime story whispered, every lullaby hummed against her ear, every braid woven through her hair with trembling hands. That woman was not a prison. That woman had fought. Are you still there? She asked softly. Owaino's eyes shivered. A tear broke from the corner of her left eye. Her mouth moved, struggling against itself, as though two voices wrestled inside one throat. Run, Owaino gasped. But Nambi didn't run. She stepped forward. The stone beneath her feet pulsed as if alive. The chains of bone that once bound the coffin now curled like dead vines at her feet. Nambi knelt and reached out. The moment her hands touched Owaino's arms, a jolt of cold thundered through her, as if winter itself had entered her bones. Please, she whispered. Come home. The thing inside Owaino laughed. She is mine now. But Nambi held on. Her hands tightened. No. She's mine. With every ounce of strength left in her body, she dragged Owaino's body from the coffin. The moment she pulled, the walls of the chamber began to quake. Screams echoed from the bone tunnels. The earth howled with anger. The bracelet flared. Behind her, the bone hunter shrieked in fury, sensing a prisoner escaping. Nambi didn't look back. She pulled Owaino into the tunnel. The bones tried to stop her. They reached out again, ribs bending like claws, skulls gnashing their teeth, but the bracelet's light burned them away. The whispers screamed now, not pleading but cursing. You will pay. You broke the seal. She will consume you both. But Nambi crawled, dragging her mother's limp form behind her, even as Owaino's eyes shifted from desperate to dark and back again. The tunnel groaned and tried to collapse. The ceiling dripped blood. The soil burned to the touch. Nambi's nails tore. Her knees split open from jagged stones. Her lungs begged for rest. But she didn't stop. In the final stretch, where the tunnel rose steeply to the surface, she saw the faint glow of the blood moon seeping through a crack in the soil. The fig tree's roots writhed above like black veins, drinking the last drops of night. She reached the surface. With a scream, she shoved the last weight of her mother's body up into the world of the living. The earth spat them out. The fig tree shook violently. The grave exploded upward in a blast of dust and breath in red moonlight. And then, all was still. They lay in the clearing. Nambi gasping for air, Owaino's body resting beside her. The villagers had long fled from the strange phenomena of the night. Only her grandmother stood in the distance, watching, trembling, hands clasped tightly in prayer. Nambi turned to her mother. Owaino's chest rose and fell. She was breathing. Alive. Mama, she whispered. Owaino's head turned toward her. Her eyes opened. But they weren't her mother's eyes. They were black. A darkness deeper than night, deeper than the tunnels. And her mouth moved, shaped by lips that belonged to love but twisted by something colder. It is free now, she said. And then she smiled. The morning sun broke through the fog like pale knives, and Owaino stood in the middle of the village path, barefoot, her eyes still soaked in black. Around her, life wilted. Crops browned overnight. Chickens lay still in the dust, necks twisted unnaturally. Goats screamed through the night, then died without wounds. By midday, the whispers began. She walks in a dead woman's skin. Her spirit is rotten. That's no mother, it's something else. Burn them. Burn the curse out. Nambi watched from the edge of the homestead as the village, her village, gathered with machetes and torches. Children were pulled inside. Old men wrapped herbs in cloth and muttered chants. The air thickened with fear. But the worst part, the part that twisted Nambi's stomach, was that she understood their fear. Owaino hadn't spoken since that night. She barely blinked, and when she did, her eyes shimmered with things no one could bear to see. People claimed they heard voices when she passed, dead voices. A woman miscarried just from brushing her hand. Another man lost his sight after meeting her gaze. Even the soil seemed to dry where she walked. Nambi's grandmother sobbed and begged the elders for more time. But the council declared the curse needed a purge, mother and daughter both. The final straw came when a newborn died before sunrise, found with its eyes black as soot. At dusk, Nambi heard the drumming. The crowd came. She didn't wait. She grabbed Owaino's wrist, still warm, still human, and fled. They vanished into the forest, chased by fire and screams. The ancient shrine stood hidden beneath twisted roots and crumbling idols, long forgotten by all but the oldest spirits. No one dared go near it. Not since the first daughters began disappearing generations ago. But Nambi knew. Her grandmother had whispered of this place once, where the veil between worlds was thinnest, where truth echoed louder than lies. The shrine pulsed with its own heartbeat, alive with ghost light. Inside, she lit the herbs from Owaino's letter. She scattered the ashes in a circle. She placed the bracelet in the center, its bone glowing faintly. The walls moaned with memories. The wind outside died. Owaino sat silently in the middle, her breathing slow and shallow. Her face had moments of clarity, of softness, but they faded like a candle struggling in the dark. Nambi faced her. Her voice was steady. "You're not just my mother anymore," she said. "You're a cage." The demon inside stirred. Owaino looked up, and her lips curled into something between grief and mockery. "Will you kill me?" the voice hissed. "You dug me up, daughter. You made the choice." Nambi shook her head. "I'm making another." She pricked her finger with a bone shard, letting her blood drip into the shrine's circle. The soil drank it like water after drought. The bracelet responded, flaring white-hot. "I am the first daughter of a first daughter," Nambi said. Her voice echoed across the stones. "And I claim what is mine." The demon screamed, not from pain, but from laughter. The shrine darkened. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes, children stolen, daughters drowned, mothers burning. The curse stretched back centuries. "You think this blood makes you strong?" the demon snarled. "You think the dead will bow to you?" "No," Nambi whispered. "But I will make them listen." She stepped into the circle. The fire around her didn't burn. Her blood marked the ground. And then she began to speak, not in words, but in memory. She called on Owaino's lullabies, her laughter, the feel of her arms wrapped in moonlight. She called on everything good that the demon had tried to rot. The demon howled in rage. Owaino's face twisted. The black bled from her eyes like ink. "Stop, please," the true voice broke through. "It hurts. I can't hold it." Nambi knelt beside her. "I know. But I'm here. I'm stronger now." The demon lashed out. A wave of darkness smashed through the shrine, shattering stone and ripping bark from trees. Nambi flew back but stood again, bleeding. I won't let you win. Then the demon changed its strategy. The shadows around them shimmered and reformed. Owino stood tall. Whole. Radiant. Alive. She reached out with soft, perfect hands and smiled the smile Nambi remembered from her childhood. You can have this, the demon said through the illusion. You can have her. Just stop. Nambi's hands shook. There she was, her mother, alive, healed, her voice untouched by grief. The vision sang the lullaby Nambi had forgotten long ago. It hurt so much to look. Her knees buckled with longing. You deserve this, the demon coaxed. Don't fight. Let it be. But then she looked closer. There was no scar on her mother's wrist, the one she got when she shielded Nambi from a falling lantern. No calluses on her palm from grinding grain. No love in her eyes. Just hunger. You're not her, Nambi whispered. She wouldn't lie to me. She clenched her fists and screamed. Get out. The shrine burst with white fire, the bracelet burning like a sun in her hand. The vision vanished. And Owino, broken, gasping, collapsed in her daughter's arms. Mama? Nambi whispered. Owino looked up, her eyes clear for the first time. Finish it, she rasped. Before it comes back. Please. I want to rest. But Nambi's hands refused to move. Tears fell like rain. How do you kill the only person who ever loved you? And yet. She looked down at her mother. The demon was waiting. Just beneath the surface. Smiling still. Nambi knew her next choice would change everything. The choice hung heavy in the air, thicker than smoke, heavier than stone. Nambi cradled her mother's fading body in her arms. Owino's eyes were clear now, no trace of black or shadow, just pain, and love, and a desperate plea. End it, she whispered again. Before I'm lost for good. Nambi's heart cracked. She had already lost her once, buried her, mourned her, wondered every day what had really happened. To lose her again, this time by her own hand, felt like plunging a dagger into her soul. But she wasn't just a daughter anymore. She was the last link in a cursed line, and the only one who could sever it. The bracelet lay beside her, still glowing faintly. Nambi picked it up. Her fingers trembled as she looked at its jagged bone edge, her mother's, passed down through blood and pain. She pressed it against her palm. The sharp bone bit deep. Blood welled up, dark and thick, dripping onto the stone beneath them. It hissed where it fell, the earth itself reacting. The demon surged forward with a roar, tearing through Owino's body in a final attempt to escape. Shadows whipped through the shrine like screaming wind, and for a moment, Nambi couldn't see anything but swirling darkness. But Owino held on. From within, her voice echoed, soft, firm, unbroken. Now, child. Now. Nambi pressed her bleeding palm to the ground, tracing a spiral into the cracked earth. Her blood moved like it had a mind of its own, forming a perfect sigil, one that pulsed with the power of generations. The bracelet sparked in her hand, fusing with the blood. The demon shrieked. The roots of the sacred fig tree burst through the shrine walls, twisting like serpents, reaching toward the symbol. The earth shook violently. Dust fell like rain. Stones split apart. A crack tore through the floor, revealing an endless pit beneath, hungry and dark. Owino's body rose, eyes glowing gold now, her spirit fully awakened, and she walked into the sigil. I love you, Nambi, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. And then the tree's roots wrapped around her, around the demon, around the centuries of pain. The final scream was one of rage and release. The roots plunged downward, dragging the demon with them. Owino's body turned to light, her spirit soaring up for a breathless instant before being pulled down, wrapped in roots, sealed beneath the earth. The shrine exploded in light. When Nambi opened her eyes, she was alone. The ground had sealed again. No trace of the fig tree's violence remained, only stillness. The sun had risen. Blood caked her arms, and the sigil was now burned into her skin, a spiral of bone and flame. She crawled out of the ruins, every muscle screaming. Her limbs ached. Her body was scraped raw from stone and ash. Her eyes burned from salt and smoke. But she was alive. And something inside her was still burning, not in pain, but in power. The village was silent when she returned. They saw her coming, limping, bloodied, with that strange mark glowing faintly on her palm, and they didn't speak. Children clutched their mothers. Elders stepped back. Even the dogs wouldn't bark. They didn't chase her away this time. They watched. The crops were already healing. Leaves were green again. The newborn who had died the night before cried out in its cradle. The river near the fields began to flow again. It was over. The curse had lifted. But the girl who had lifted it was no longer just Nambi. They whispered behind her back, Spirit Walker, Death Daughter, Grave Queen. But no one dared touch her. She didn't stay. She returned to the graveyard. Where it all began. She walked barefoot among the stones, her shadow long in the morning light. The place felt different, quieter, lighter, as if a heavy blanket had been lifted. The grave where a wino had once been buried was smooth now, fresh earth marked only by the soft impression of a spiral. Nambi knelt beside it. She pressed her hand to the soil, and this time, it was warm. A single flower, white, fragile, trembling, bloomed from the center of the grave. Nambi smiled. Rest now, Mama, she whispered. You're free. A wind stirred the tall grasses around her, brushing her cheeks like a kiss. She stood and turned. And with slow, steady steps, she walked away from the graves. She had gone into the earth as a curious, rebellious girl, tugged by whispers, haunted by questions, hunted by fears. But now? Now she was something else. She went into the grave as a girl. She came out as something more.